Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is Tim Pennell from NQA here, and welcome to this webinar about ISO 22301 and the future of your continuity plans. This webinar is being recorded right now, and from the outset, I just want you to know, I'll remind you that you'll be receiving a copy of these slides and a copy of the recording. Now, today, giving the webinar is myself, Tim Pennell, Mel Blackmore from Blackmores, and Rachel Churchman, also from Blackmores. By way of introduction, I'll talk you through myself, and we'll have a question and answer session at the end. I'm Tim Pennell. I'm NQA's business unit manager for information security, resilience, and privacy. I've been involved in resilience, if you like, for quite some time, which of course involved business continuity. Back in my previous career, I was working for a large telecoms company, where I was a civil resilience duty officer and involved in various incidents, both in the UK and globally, such as the nuclear reactor disaster in Japan and Pakistan floods. I've been involved in developing business continuity plans, in fact, pandemic plans a number of years ago, and exercising those as well within organizations. I most recently had significant experience in cybersecurity incidents, which of course can invoke business continuity plans. And there are quite a lot of crossovers between the cybersecurity incidents and business continuity. So I'm looking forward to sharing some of that experience with you today as we talk through this webinar. I'll hand you over to Mel now.
Thanks, Tim. Yeah, so I'm the Managing Director of Blackmores. We're a consultancy firm, and we've been established for about 14 years now, and we specialise in implementing ISO standards. We've actually done this successfully for over 250 businesses in over 20 countries. And one of the standards, obviously, that we're talking about today is ISO 22301. So we have been involved with this standard for a number of years. Prior to it being an ISO standard, when it was a British standard, BS 25999, we implemented this for law firms, NHS trusts, and since then we've implemented 22301 for many of the different types of organisations. So yes, that's a little bit about me. So now I'd like to hand over to Rachel.
Thanks, Mel. Yeah, so my name's Rachel Churchman. I'm actually a managing consultant at Blackmores. So I provide the hands-on support for both implementation for certification and also ongoing development of management systems for our clients for a wide range of standards that includes ISO 22301. So I tend to be the person that sort of rocks up on site to help you as clients actually get the standard implemented in your organisation and achieve certification, and then thereafter achieve that continual improvement.
Okay, thanks very much. And a bit about NQA and a bit more about Blackmores if necessary. So about NQA, here in the UK and across the globe, NQA provides accredited certification, training and support services to help organisations improve their processes, performance and products and services. We've issued over 50,000 certificates in 90 countries. We work in close partnership with consultants who can play a really important role in helping our customers. We specialise in management system certification for quality, energy and environmental, health and safety, and information security. We work with a variety of clients, from single management systems to complex multi-site organisations, from Costa to the European Space Agency. We tailor our approach to support each individual client and make a unique price promise to our customers. You can rest assured you're in good hands. And our philosophy is never stop improving. Is there anything more you'd like to say about Blackmores as well before we proceed?
Yeah, just briefly, I did mention a little bit about the background earlier, but you know, our ethos is very much about going above and beyond the standards. So obviously it's fantastic to get certified, you know, to demonstrate credibility and confidence, but for us it's also about the journey and implementing those systems for your business. So you know, whether you're starting with a blank sheet of paper and you haven't got a business continuity plan in place, for example, and we kick off with a gap analysis to understand what you have and what you haven't got, we help you every step of the way, really, in terms of, you know, completing business impact analysis, you know, right through to internal auditing and readiness for an assessment. So one of the things I think that, you know, I guess that's makes us stand out is that we work very closely in integrating these standards within your business. So typically a company will already have ISO 9001 and 27001 in place, and that's where 27001 is blended in. So I think the experience of dealing with many different standards really does help, and have that kind of the team approach to working collaboratively with our clients to achieve certification. But we have seen an increase in demand for ISO 22301, and I'd just like to say that we, you know, more than happy to share that information today.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, so today I'm going to start off with a brief introduction to 22301, and then Mel is going to talk about the impact and the benefits of BCMS. We'll come back to me, and I'm going to look at how it can integrate into your existing certification or management system, and then how the third-party certification can help you make those decisions to safeguard your organization. And then Rachel will finish off with the 22301 transition and those key changes. And after that, we'll have Q&A. And again, as a reminder, there's a questions box. You'll be able to drop your questions in there, and any one of us will pick up and answer those questions, hopefully. And as a reminder, again, you'll all be receiving the slides and a copy of this recording. So if you missed anything, don't worry, you'll be able to pick it up. Okay, so a brief introduction to 22301, if you're not already aware. We talk about management systems providing a framework to achieve an end aim for your organization. Well, very much 22301, it develops business continuity appropriate to the amount and the type of the impact that your organization may or not be able to accept following a disruption. Okay, so it talks about that in a framework that has a set number of requirements which are consistent across all management standards, and you'll see this as we go through the rest of the presentation. You've got to understand the organization's needs and the necessity for establishing business continuity policy and objectives. You've got to be able to operate those processes. You've got to have capabilities and response structures in place to ensure your organization is going to survive disruptions. You've then got to be able to monitor and review the performance and the effectiveness of the BCMS. And of course, if you're familiar with management systems, you'll be familiar with that. And of course, everything exists in that plan, do, check, act cycle. So it's a continual improvement cycle. So understanding your organization, understanding what impacts you're prepared to tolerate and what you need to do to restore service, continually monitoring and reviewing those, and then improving. Of course, like all other management systems, you're going to have some common components to it. Policy, similarly to your quality policy or your information security policy. You've got to have competent people who have a defined set of responsibilities, and we'll look at that in a bit more detail in a second. You've got to have processes in place to deal with these things. What you absolutely don't want is business continuity responses that aren't formulated and predetermined. You've got to have documented information to support all of those processes, and you've got to have those documents available. Okay, and now I'll hand you over to Mel, who's going to talk about the benefits and impacts.
Lovely, thanks very much then, Tim. Yeah, so if we go on to the next slide then, please. Lovely, thank you. Yeah, so I think, you know, in these current times of uncertainty, we are facing very challenging times, and both employees and clients are looking for some kind of reassurance, and particularly around resilience. So it's important, you know, now more than ever to be able to demonstrate that management commitment in your overall risk management for the organisation, that will affect all of your stakeholders. And I think one of the benefits with ISO 22301 is it does provide that visible evidence to stakeholders. And I'm not just talking about a certificate and a badge. I'm talking about having those, you know, as Tim mentioned, about having that business continuity policy statement, that statement of intent. So there's so many different aspects that you can clearly demonstrate to your stakeholders your level of commitment to resilience. And with that, it also encourages clear communication on what employees need to do in order to be able to recover from an incident. A lot of people think of business continuity as just dealing with disaster recovery, when it's much broader than that. And it's always about the interruption to your services and how you can overcome those and to continue to provide your products and services. So as a result of that, that works across different departments, and also, you know, within your organisation, various coordinations with different suppliers as well. It also helps to demonstrate compliance with the expectations of regulators, insurers. I'll come on to talk about one of the benefits from an insurance perspective later on, but also your business partners and other key stakeholders. So, I mean, one of the areas here really is, you know, if you've got agreed service level agreements and contracts in place, you know, having that solid BCP really does help to uphold those commitments, and it makes it really clear on how you're going to be meeting those requirements. So the next benefit is all to do with your reputation. Okay, I mean, how many organisations within your industry are certified to ISO 22301? There may be a few of them. There may not be any. You could actually be the first to be certified to ISO 22301, therefore giving you the competitive edge, okay, which again, in these challenging times, is definitely going to be advantageous. So it's worthwhile actually doing a bit of research on that. So not just looking at it from you know, an operational perspective, but also from a commercial perspective as well, and using it as a sales and marketing tool. It also helps to, you know, maintain your reputation. So if you have got some really valuable clients that you're very keen on retaining, it helps to, you know, to maintain your reputation and even improve it, you know, through demonstrating through a professional approach how you manage any types of disruption. And let's face it, you know, no business is perfect. There will be disruptions, whether that's caused internally through, it could be an IT issue and, you know, loss of access to IT systems, or whether it's an external influencing factor like a pandemic, for example. And then finally, it also provides a positive message that you can communicate to your key stakeholders in that crisis. Okay, so with 22301, many of our clients will have scripts ready to go and designated spokesmen, spokeswomen to be able to communicate exactly what they want to communicate and when. And that's kind of cascaded down throughout the business continuity team. So it just helps you to be prepared and have that kind of professional approach throughout. The next benefit is all around the protection and the recovery of your business critical functions and processes. So do you actually know what your most valuable assets, your most valuable functions are and processes? You probably have a rough idea, but business continuity standards such as ISO 22301 really provides that kind of methodology in the process to be able to clearly define those really valuable assets, and also, more importantly, about the impact of the disruption on those as well. So, I mean, in terms of what's critical to your business, it could be data, it could be your building, it could be your production facility, okay? So it can vary from company to company. So it also provides a timely and orderly response to incidents and business disruptions. So it makes it absolutely crystal clear throughout your organisation who's going to do what and when within an acceptable predefined level, okay? I think the other thing as well that we find with businesses that don't have ISO 22301, generally speaking, they don't actually test their business continuity plans. And one of the requirements is that you have scenario-based exercising. Okay, so unfortunately, a lot of businesses that might have a BCP on paper are just paying lip service to it. And so one of the key benefits of 22301 is it helps you to put that to the test. You don't actually know if it's going to work unless you test it. And that's generally where it kind of feeds into that plan, do, check, act loop on continual improvement. So therefore, it helps to increase the survival chance of both the organisation and employees' jobs and other dependents as well. And finally, it just helps to give you that extra level of resilience and also recovery capability. Okay, so it's one thing to respond to an incident, but obviously you want to have a sustainable, profitable, successful business. So it's all about the continued recovery and survival of the organisation. The final benefit is financial. Okay, so we know at the moment, you know, we're heading into what's supposed to be one of the worst recessions in recent times. So it's important more than ever to look at the financial benefits of having a resilient organisation. Okay, so it helps to improve your risk profile, particularly when you're looking at your insurance renewal. So it might be worthwhile having a look at when your insurance policy is up for renewal and to see if there might be a benefit of having certified management systems such as ISO 22301 with a UCAS accredited certification body such as NQA, and just to see what the difference in those premiums would be. Because ultimately this standard was created to reduce risk. Okay, and that's obviously what insurance is all about. So if you can actively demonstrate that, then in many cases there is a reduction in your insurance costs. Okay, but insurance aside, it also obviously helps to reduce the actual financial damage of any incidents and disruptions. So quite often when we implement this standard, we want to understand what the impact is going to be for losing a particular, you know, product, service for a defined period of time, and what the cost of that is going to be to the business. Okay, now within a law firm, that's easy to do. You know, it's billable hours, for example. So that really does help you to put together a strong business case on how you know, you can have some financial return on investment from 22301. And then finally, you know, if there was an incident and you did have to make financial claims, it provides you with that quantifiable evidence that you can then use if you need to claim compensation. So hopefully that's given you an overview on the main benefits. So just in summary, the 4 key benefits there are to demonstrate leadership commitment to resilience, reputational, protection and recovery of business critical functions and processes, and finally the financial benefits as well. So that's all from me. I'd like to hand back over to Tim. Okay,
thanks, Mel. Right, I'm going to look at integration now and how it integrates with existing other standards. And if you're familiar with Annex SL, then the structure of ISO management system standards are all very similar. You've got section 4, the context of the organization, 5 is leadership, and then you go through planning, support, operation, performance evaluation, and so on. And in fact, there's an excellent resource on the NQA website which lists out all of those standards by row, and indeed there's a slide later on that shows that in part. But what I'm going to do is call out some of the examples just to make a point of how similar they are across the standards. So I'm going to compare 9001 and 22301. If I do look at clause 4, context of the organization. Now, 9001, there's 2 clauses: understanding the organization, its context, and then understanding the needs and expectations of interested parties. Well, 22301 has the same, except it's got 2 extra sections to it, and that's just a structuring. The requirement is exactly identical. If I then look down to section 5, where we look at the policy, in 9001, it says establish the quality policy and communicate the quality policy. Well, in 22301, it simply says establish the business continuity policy and communicate the business continuity policy. And then down in section 6, we've got quality objectives and how to achieve them, and naturally business continuity objectives and planning to achieve those. Then section 7, again, you've got support. Now, section 7 in 9001, there's quite a bit more there, whereas 22301 simply says the organisation shall determine and provide the resources needed for the BCMS. So in that respect, it's quite a lot simpler than 9001. Section 8 is the operation bit, and of course you'll be aware then that section 8 is different across all of the standards. Section 8 is really the meat of these standards and where you're implementing the sort of subject specific operations that you need to do. And I won't go into too much detail on operation, but clearly if you get hold of a copy of the standard, you'll see there. But it covers off, which we will look at in this presentation, business impact analysis, business continuity strategies and plans, and then your exercise program, again, which we'll look at in a bit more detail. And then finally, performance evaluation and continual improvement. Again, there's very little difference. All of those things such as management reviews, internal audits, monitoring and measurement and so on. Again, all consistent across those standards. Let's have a look a bit more now at the implementation and the operation. So planning and implementing, if you're familiar with 27001, you've got planning and implementing, which also includes the risk assessment. Of course, here you've got to establish criteria for your processes and your criteria for assessing things in order to control your processes. This you need to take into account, of course, as well your outsourced processes and your supply chain in order to control that. And you'll see in the standard that 22301 really considers the importance of your supply chain. And it may be, as well as an organization, you are in a supply chain. Most of us are, I suppose. And therefore, organizations to whom you're supplying will have typically considered you as part of their supply chain. So you're going to be doing a business impact analysis and a risk assessment. We'll cover that in the next few slides. But then you're also going to be looking at strategies and solutions, and then your plans and procedures, and your exercising, which Mel has already referred to, and I'm going to refer to as well in the importance of that. And then evaluating it, you're testing it and confirming that it's all fit and in place. So let's have a look at the business impact risk assessment. Again, a bit like 27001, and there's some very good ISO documents giving advice on guidance on how to do that. As Mel said, you've really got to know what are your key activities. Now, organizations will have several activities, but not all of them are key to fulfilling their core purpose or purposes. You need to understand what they are in order of importance, and this is very much a process-focused approach, so almost inputs and outputs, and what are those key activities throughout there, and any key points of failure as well, and how they can have an impact on your processes and the organization's outputs over a period of time. And if you're not familiar with business continuity, this is where the standard is really helpful, because it does explain business continuity in a sense, so that it's asking you to work out how long you can cope for with those disruptions. And then importantly, what level of resumption you need to have in place to restore those services. For example, do you need to fully restore a service? Do you have to get 100% of the service operational? Or actually, can you cope with, say, 50% or 70%? And how long it's going to take to get there? So you're setting yourself these objectives. And there's a point really where it gets to something where I'm not going to say lights out, because that's a bit too catastrophic, but there's going to be a point where it becomes unacceptable to the organization, where you really absolutely must do something about a disruption. And the terminology used there is the maximum tolerable point of disruption. And indeed, Mel may correct me on this, but I think in an earlier version in BS 25999, they also had a thing called recovery point objectives, which talked about at which level of recovery you wanted to achieve. And again, I refer to the supply chain, and I'll keep coming back to this. And this is interesting now, particularly with changing business environments, with many organizations outsourcing, for example, a lot of their IT to cloud services. You've got to start thinking about some of those activities and any external resources in particular that are supporting what you do. And it may well be power, water, IT, or whatever, but the extent to which they're supporting your activities. And it's interesting, I think COVID has thrown up an interesting point where many supply chains have shown themselves to be quite brittle in a sense. Just-in-time concepts and lean organizations has actually shown there's not too much fat in the system. Now, the beauty of 22301 allows you to identify those resources and then model them in such a way that you can determine the extent that you need them or are dependent upon them. And then finally, you're going to do your risk assessment. And of course, risk is typically the likelihood of something happening times the impact upon it. And that will allow you to identify which risks you want to treat. Some risks you may decide to accept. Some risks you may have transferred. Insurance is a case in point. You might decide that you're handing it off to your insurers to cope with that in case something goes wrong. And you may just choose to ignore it. The important thing is, though, that what you're looking for are credible risks, risks that really can and would affect the business. So once you've done your business impact analysis and your risk assessment, you've got to identify strategies and solutions in order to meet the requirements that you identify in order to recover and to protect the organization. Now, really what we're talking about here are choices. And that's why it's important to have your business impact assessment and your risk assessment done to a set of criteria that you've determined. You've understood the organization, and now you've come up with a set of choices, and this is where you put those strategies and solutions in place in order of importance. And as I said, you're doing these in order to limit that period of disruption to an organization's products and services. Part of that, of course, is the costs and benefits. And again, we come back to your risk assessment. Some things may be just too expensive to fix, and you decide you'll run with, say, a reduced level of service, for example, until you can find alternative solutions. And that's really important because when you are running any kind of management system standard and you've taken a risk-based approach, quite often you then have to go and have a conversation with, say, the chief finance officer or whoever holds the purse strings. And so what you want to be able to do is to articulate what the risks are and those business impacts, and then the costs and needs of restoration. And you need to have that conversation in terms that your finance person are going to understand, which is why having the right strategies and solutions in place is important. And these are all of the things you're typically going to be considering. And that's why having a consultant such as Blackmores alongside you, helping every step of the way, bringing all of that experience to consider those kind of things that would be really important. And of course, if you choose NQA as your certification partner, we're quite experienced in this, we're very experienced in this kind of stuff. And these are the kind of things we'll be looking for confirmation that you've considered as part of your business impact strategies and solutions. Now, once you've defined your strategy and solutions, you've then got to start building them, making them happen. And you start with typically defining your procedures. And the important thing is that they've got to be specific. Responding to incidents need to be specific. There's no place for ambiguity in a high tempo or high pressured situation. But equally, they've got to be, ironically, sufficiently generic to be able to cope with most situations. So, for example, you may well have a central telephone number to call in the event of an incident which would trigger the business continuity plan or contact the business continuity manager. Your procedures, they've got to focus on and minimize the impact of the incident in accordance with your strategies and solutions, which again are in turn derived from your business impact analysis. What's really important, and I've got some great experience at this, of having properly assigned roles and responsibilities. I can tell you there's nothing worse than having an incident management room convened filled with senior managers who all think they're in charge. And indeed, I've worked with some organizations who have successfully assigned a business continuity manager who calls the shots. So while you might have senior executives there who are responsible for financial decisions and whatnot, typically, quite often, a business continuity manager is a person who's experienced in this and knows what decisions and what calls to make and how to manage incidents. And then within those roles and responsibilities, there'll be various key roles, again, for managing those procedures or components that are essential for restoring your service. I touched on having a business continuity team manager. Having a response structure which has really laid out those people responsible stops all those different hairs running and people going off and doing their own things that they might think is being really helpful, but actually, if it's not part of the plan, if they've gone off piste, really doesn't help matters. So defining that response structure ensures that the business sticks to the plan. Now, Mel talked about warning and communications. I can't emphasize enough the importance of properly controlled and approved and managed communications. And again, I've been in incidents where because the communication weren't managed, we had customers finding out via Twitter that something had gone wrong. We had different parts of the business responding differently based on rumors and assumptions. So ideally, having a single source for communications, and it may be that you have one set of communications for customers and one set of communications for internal, and making sure that those communications are timely and they're accurate and they're authorized are so important. And again, that would be defined within your procedures and assigned to one or more persons to be responsible for that. Now, your documented plans. The important thing about plans is they've got to be available, especially if you've if that's a consequence of the disruption. They're not where people don't have access to particular information and resources, so the right people have to have access to these. Now, they can be hard to write, particularly if you've never written them before. And again, this is where people like Blackmores are great to help you do this. But the thing to do is to think of them going through step by step, a bit like a good book. It's got a beginning, middle, and end. And sometimes it's actually helpful to start at the end state and work backwards towards what would have caused the disruption. And that helps you put in place all the required elements to it, step by step by step. And if as you're building the plans, you can model them against your procedures and so on to make sure that all of those steps are happening, and therefore that service is going to be restored as you expected it to from your business impact analysis. There's no point in having plans that aren't meeting the requirement. Similarly, if you find that as a consequence of creating your plans, you're not meeting your targets, then maybe your business impact analysis was incorrect in the first place. And yes, it should be detailed out. And as I said, you don't want it to be too ambiguous. But equally, if it's over detailed, it can be hard to follow as well. As a slight segue, some of you may well be aware of the jet airliner that landed in the Hudson River and was subject to the film Sully. If you've seen it, you'll know that there was a procedure for ditching in water, but the manual was so long they couldn't respond in time. You want your documented processes to be appropriate to the situation and contain the required level of detail. And then the exercise program. There are different types of exercises. There are exercises from desktop paper-based right down to a full-blown actual real shutdown of your services, possibly out of hours. You need to build a program to determine that your plans are valid, but your exercise program needs to test all of the relevant components to it. What you don't want, for example, is just to do a desktop paper-based exercise and think, okay, I've done it. Because how do you know that actually things are going to work as anticipated? Does a desktop exercise take into account, for example, IT failure? And it's actually quite fun as well to do these exercises, whereby you can start to factor in injects and things like that. So even if you're not properly shutting down parts of your organization, you can involve people within the exercise who are actually sitting at the desk doing their job, but get them to send an inject or something like that to say such and such hasn't worked. What's important, of course, as well, is that whenever any exercise is being run and you're using your normal infrastructure, say an email, in the subject line and the top of the email, you've got exercise, 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 so people actually don't start reacting, thinking something real has happened. But choosing the scenarios can be difficult as well. It's important that you have the right people engaged. Again, if you're an organization of a certain size and you've created an exercise that only exercises part of the business, you'll find that other representatives are disenfranchised or not engaged, and they think, what does it mean for me? And they might not necessarily take it seriously. So when you're planning your exercise and working them out, you're looking at those incidents and parts of the business that you want to check, but also that you're involving the right people. And it helps reinforce the importance of business continuity, because a lot of the time it just doesn't happen. Fortunately, most of the time things don't go wrong. And you can get skill fade, you can get memory fade. So it's really important to ensure that you engage the right people. And at the end of it, get those lessons fed back in and make sure that they're factored into future exercises as well as your business continuity plans. This part is often neglected, and again, if you've got someone like Blackmores helping you, they'll make sure that those lessons are learned. That's also factored then into your business management system, business continuity management system, because when NQA turn up and look at your audit or audit you, if we see that you've conducted an exercise and that there's no lessons learned, nothing happening within that plan, do, check, act cycle, then that tells us that actually you're not fully following your management system process. And as ever, in the good old plan, do, check, act cycle, 22301 specifically calls out these requirements here. And it's in section 8.6, and it's a bit odd really, because it's not equivalent to other standards, and it is part of that whole check cycle. And it's a bit like performance evaluation, but it really is hammering home the point that for a successful business continuity plan, you've got to be checking it, you've got to be testing it, and you've got to be exercising it. And it's really important that you're exercising it or flowing down the requirement to suppliers and partners. That may be that you can't exercise the loss of a supplier for real. You can certainly simulate that exercise, but I also asking your suppliers and partners what they're doing in order to ensure service through their own business continuity planning. And if you're subject at all to any legal and regulatory requirements that requires a certain level of service or whatnot, then again, you'll be evaluating that within the context of your BSMS. Okay, right, I'm going to hand you over to Rachel now, who's going to talk about the key changes to 22301.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for that. Yes, so as Tim mentioned, the ISO 22301 standard has recently undergone a review. So on the screen, you'll be able to see the timeline, and you can see that business continuity as a formal standard has been in place for 14 years, starting with BS 25999 way back in 2006, and over the years has developed and actually became an international standard in 2012. So the last update was actually made in October last year, and it will be the changes between the 2012 and the 2019 version that I'll be chatting through today with you. Okay, so there is a transition timeline. So, oh, sorry. Okay, so as with all updated standards, there is always a transition timeline in place to the new version. So this is to enable any organisations that are currently certified against the 2012 version to be able to review the new requirements and make the adjustments as necessary to their management systems, and to audit themselves on that, and also have the external audit completed on their management system before they can be officially transitioned to the new standard. So the timeline, as you can see on screen, is that organisations can now be certified against the 2019 revision of the standard. By April the 30th next year, most certification bodies are going to cease certification to the 2012 version, and they will be looking to move existing companies across to the new 2019 version from that point. And by October 31st, 2022, that's basically the deadline that all organisations need to transition across to the new version. So you're given sort of just over 2 years to get that transition in place. Okay, so what are the high-level changes? So some of the high-level changes we're going to go through have already been sort of touched upon in previous slides. But as Tim mentioned, the new standard aligns far more closely with other ISO standards. The business continuity strategy is now more clearly expressed as business continuity strategy and solutions, and I'll chat about that in a moment. The operational clause 8, which is the sort of doing part of the standard, as Tim mentioned, has been streamlined. In the 2012 version of the standard, it was quite complex. There was a lot of repetition. So the terminology has been simplified there, and it actually flows a lot better in the new standard. There's now specific focus on planning for changes in the business continuity management system. So where previously implied, this is now actually a new clause, and I'll talk to you about that in a moment. And the business continuity plans, there's a far stronger link to the supporting teams, people and resource that's going to be required to respond to a disruption. So this all falls under that sort of more clarity within that operational clause 8. And lastly, there's actually fewer mandatory documentation requirements. So I'll touch on that at the end. So I'm just going to go through these in a slightly more detail, just to give you a little bit more context. Okay, so for the organisations that are certified to multiple standards, you'll all be really pleased to know that it's now aligning far more closely to the Annex SL requirements, as Tim noted when he gave you those comparison examples with 9001 and 14001. And one of the biggest areas of change in the new standard does actually come in clause 4, the context, because previously in the 2012 version, this was quite a complex clause with some very prescriptive requirements that you had to demonstrate within your management system, and it was far over and above some of the other standards. So that's now been refined, and some of those requirements have now been built in later in the operational area of the standard, rather than all of them sitting up in clause 4 of the standard. Okay, if we go to the next slide. Okay, so strategy and solution. So Tim touched on this. There is now a far broader approach from just merely strategy-based approach to business continuity. You still have to have a strategy in place to ensure business continuity, but the new standard is going further and looking for organisations to actually define the solutions they need to put in place to enable that strategy to happen. So this is strategy at a practical level. So I'll give you an example. An example might be that an organisation has the high-level BCP strategy of working from home in the event of a business continuity event that's going to disrupt their organisation. And that's quite typical, I think, of the whole COVID response for most organisations. So the strategy is quite sound. A lot of organisations can continue at a certain level with staff working from home. But when it comes to solutions, organisations are now going to have to consider at a practical level, what do they need in place to enable that strategy? So for instance, does everybody have the capability to work from home? Is their home bandwidth adequate? Do they have the right equipment they need? Is everyone going to use VPN to access systems and software? And if so, can your VPN system cope with that increased traffic? Do you have enough licenses or license seats? Because there might be some software that is now going to be used more intensively in this working from home situation. So as Tim said, it's the solutions element that potentially is going to impact that budget planning for business continuity, because these sorts of things are going to need to be considered as part of your planning. Okay, if we have the next slide. Okay, so from an operational point of view, the operational requirements are now far more streamlined. And as I mentioned before, there are repetitions removed. So there's other improvements to include. The requirements for conducting business impact analysis are now clearer. It's quite step by step in terms of what you need to do. There is now a requirement to ensure that those outsourced processes, the supply chain, as Tim mentioned, are controlled. And in terms of control, that also includes understanding what the supply chain resilience currently is. And do we need to look at widening and broadening our supply chain in the event of a business continuity event? Okay, as covered earlier, there's now a requirement to implement and maintain selected business continuity solutions so that they can be activated when needed. So in addition to what was mentioned previously, resources has been expanded to also include transportation and logistics. So we're really looking quite far in those strategies and solutions. The guidance around business continuity plans, including response structure, is more prescriptive, because it's understood that it might not just be the one team that's needing to respond to an event. There might be multiple teams in play during a response. There's also a requirement to ensure that alternates or deputies are identified. And one of the new requirements is that the deputies need to have their responsibilities, authorities, and competence defined and documented. There is also now the direct reference to validating those continuity strategies and solutions. So that's the testing and the exercising side of things. So as Tim mentioned, it's not just doing the tabletop walkthrough exercises that are going to be sufficient anymore. They're not going to go far enough in testing those solutions. So that could be a significant change for some organisations that have previously sort of managed to sort of carry on with just tabletop and theoretical exercising. Another positive step forward is actually a formal requirement to manage changes to the business continuity management system. So it's now a mandatory clause, whereas previously it was just implied. And the requirements that the standard define require you to consider the following points. So you need to consider what the purpose of the change is and the consequences on the management system. Is the integrity of the business continuity management system impacted? Do you need to revisit business impact analysis? Do you need to go back and revisit your risk assessment as a result of the change? Have you got the resource available to perform the change? And remember, resource isn't just people, it's software, it's time, it could be external third parties as well. And you need to be able to define any change in responsibilities or authorities as a result of the change. So this whole new clause does ensure that the business continuity management system stays relevant and effective at the point it's invoked for the business. Okay, so teams and people, a little bit more detail around this. So BCP is all about how a business responds to an event, which by definition is going to involve people and teams. But the wording now stipulates, and it uses the word shall, that there needs to be a structured response. and there may be one or more teams responsible for responding to disruptions. And the relationship between those teams needs to be stated, as well as their roles and responsibilities. And this goes back to what Tim was saying about having lots of chiefs in a room and everyone thinking that they're in charge of the response. But actually, we need to have clarity on roles and responsibilities to avoid that conflict or confusion or duplication of effort. So each team has to identify who's needed and what the role is. They need to include deputies as well, because we can't assume everybody is going to be available in the event of an incident. And we need to ensure that the competence is there for that role in that plan. They also need to have sufficient detail on how to manage immediate consequences of the disruption, and that includes impact on their immediate environment as well. Each plan has to have a process for standing down. So not only do you need a process for invoking business continuity, you need to have that clear communication in the business when things have actually returned to normal and we're coming back to normal operations. And most importantly, and this isn't actually a new requirement, but it is a very important one, each plan needs to be usable and available at the time and place at which it's required. So that means you need to ensure that the right information is in the right place, available to the right people, so that in the event of a disruption, people have the information they need to be able to perform that plan in line with the planned response. Okay, and lastly, I did mention that there are fewer mandatory document requirements. So as you know, the standard refers to documents and records as documented information. So in the 2012 version, there were 25 defined documented information requirements, where the standard uses the word shall. In the 2019 version, this is reduced to 12. So some of the documented elements removed as mandatory include the following. So documented context, documented process for BIA and risk assessment, documented results of BIA and risk assessment, documented decision on whether you're going to communicate externally around your BCP risks and impacts, communication with interested parties, including national regional risk advisory systems, which was quite tenuous in my opinion anyway, records of those important decisions and actions to take, the results of actions addressing adverse trends or results, results of post-incident review. So these, sorry Tim, you can go back. So these document requirements that have been removed, although they're removed as mandatory, I think we can all agree that there is still merit in having some of these elements defined within your management system, if only to provide clarity to those managing the BCMS. Some of the mandatory documents in the 2019 version include having that list of regulatory and legal requirements, competencies of personnel, business continuity plans and procedures still need to be documented, as do the procedures for warning and communication. So they have reduced, but anyone who has the old standard with these documents in place, I would suggest that they have a place in the business continuity management system, and there is no need to sort of strip them out if you're transitioning to the new version. Okay, so I'll pass back to Tim now for Q&A.
Thanks very much. Right, folks, that concludes the formal presentation part of the webinar. I'm now opening the webinar out to questions. Please free to type a question into the question box. They'll pop up for Rachel, Mel and I to answer. As a reminder, of course, you will be getting the slides and this recording at the end of this webinar. Okay, we've got a question from Wayne. What is the average cost of certification? Well, Wayne, there's two parts to that. One will be the building and establishing your business continuity management system in the first place. And the extent to which you do that, or the cost of that, may well be determined by involving a consultants firm such as Blackmores, and I'll let Mel or Rachel to answer to that point of view. With a certification body like NQA, then you would have a stage 1 audit followed by a stage 2 audit, and the number of days involved in those audits really is determined by the size of your organization and therefore the scope of your business continuity management system. NQA's sales team would quote for the number of days. So let's assume it was 1 day for a stage 1 and maybe 2 to 2.5 or 3 days for a stage 2 audit. Then you would have 2 surveillance audits over the coming years, followed by a recertification audit. So you've got your initial establishment to become certified, and then the maintenance and recertification of that over a 3-year period. NQA's day rate is comparable with many other certification bodies and competitively priced. But I would ask you to contact our sales team who could come up with the right quote for an organization of your size. It's not something I could directly answer here on the webinar. I don't know if Rachel and Mel, you want to add anything to that about involving consultancy?
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, you know, if a company wants to go ahead and do it on their own, that's absolutely fine. Then obviously there's going to be no cost, external costs incurred for that. Just your time and effort, really, and also other people that are involved in the process. Obviously, you know, if you're not familiar with 22301, if you haven't kind of been there, done it, and got the badge, as it were, there will be lessons learned, good and bad, along the way, if you're doing it yourself. So we quite often, you know, using a consultant just helps you to kind of get the most out of ISO 22301 by implementing a bespoke management system. So there's this free of charge option. Obviously there's training through NQA as well, which you could, you know, get training on it. Or if you'd like somebody to kind of, you know, help you through that process, whether it be kind of step by step and hold your hand throughout everything, you know, we can do that for you. Or we can just take, you know, a light touch approach and just kind of help to guide you along the way and just check documents as you go along. Typically for an organisation, a business continuity management system plan, if you've already got a system in place such as ISO 9001 or 27001, you're probably looking at about 12 days, and our day rate's 825, so that gives you a rough idea. But if you're going up to a larger organisation, and it does depend on the scope of certification. So as you're probably aware, you know, you could have the entire organisation certified, or you could just have a particular service or location or function certified. So again, that's why I'd go back to NQA to get as Tim said, get a quote specifically for your requirements as a business, because obviously that will vary, and it will also vary in terms of implementation costs and timescales. So I take a look at what resources you've currently got available, timescales for achieving certification as well. And, you know, you could be looking at up to 6 months if you're an SME, or 12 months, 18 months if you're a medium to larger size organisation. I think one other thing to add is that there is quite a lot of funding available, government funding available, to help businesses to grow and to basically to survive and to thrive in the current economic situation. That can be to get consultancy support, and we work with a lot of clients to help them to get that funding, and again, I'd be more than happy to speak to any businesses if they'd like to get an idea on funding that's available for their 22301 project.
Thanks, Mel. And Wayne, I've just had our sales director popping up on Teams telling me that our day rate for 22301 is £1,080. So please do get in touch with him and discuss your needs, and he'll come up with the right size quote for you. You've also gone on to ask, if you implement the standard but customers and suppliers in the chain do not, could this have an impact? as customers and suppliers are key to how continuity works, and they also play a vital part in this process. Well, the key thing here, if we talk about suppliers specifically, is that you need to seek assurance from suppliers that they are able to continue to provide a level of service that you expect or are paying for. Whether or not they implement 22301 or not, you will probably, as part of the BCMS, need to seek some form of assurance that they can continue to meet your expectations for delivery of the service. It doesn't have to be proven by having a certification, but it really does help, particularly if you're an organization with many suppliers, and it is always a burden performing assurance checks on suppliers, whether it be security, whether it be business continuity or whatever. Well, of course, having a management standard certification in place means quite often you don't need to perform that audit. You can take as read because they've got that certification. Key, of course, is the scope statement. Does it cover off the services that you are taking from that supplier? I hope that answers your questions. Mel or Rachel, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, I'm happy to add to that as well. A very good question, Wayne, that you raised. Yeah, so I think, you know, the question that you posed is, you know, if you get certified, that's great, but what if your customers and your suppliers in the chain don't? So, I mean, that could be like the analogy if you're locking the front door, but you know, the back door's wide open for anybody to walk in and and disrupt your business. So yeah, it is a very good question, and I think what we're finding now is that businesses are pushing 22301 down their supply chain. So why not make it a prerequisite for your, you know, your supply chain? If they want your business, get 22301, you know, or at least be in alignment with ISO 22301. So ask them to show you their business continuity plans. They might not obviously get to the point of showing you business impact analysis, because that could be commercially sensitive information. But, you know, you could actually have a supplier questionnaire based on the requirements of 22301 that you can push down the supply chain. And also, I think it's leading by example, isn't it? You know, if you achieve certification to 22301, you're setting the bar high within your industry, and hopefully others will follow. So you can, what I would recommend there is trying to push it down the supply chain, but also bear in mind, you know, if you've got a team of internal auditors within your company, why not get them to audit your supply chain against 22301, so that may support you overall in demonstrating best practice. Okay, so that's a service. I know that at Blackmores we do provide supplier audits as well. So hopefully that's helped to answer that question for you, Wayne.
And thanks, Mel. And to reinforce the point you made earlier, Mel, in your presentation, is one of the benefits, of course, having the certification in place is demonstrating that to your customers anyway. And it does tick that box when you receive that supplier questionnaire from your customers, even if they themselves aren't certified. Right, thanks, Wayne. I'm glad that answered your question. Okay, we'll give it a minute more. We haven't had any more questions. Oh, no, we've got one from Derek. Hi, Derek. I am in favour of ISO 22301, but the idea of pushing the supply chain to be certified reminds me of the days when councils required gardeners to be ISO 9001 certified. That's a great question, and before Mel jumps in and answers that one, I go back a long time, before 9001, into the old TQM days when everything was meant to be qualitied, and it was misunderstood, it was misused, and it was abused. I don't think that's the case anymore with these modern management system standards. I do talk a lot about security, but I've seen the benefits for, say, 27001, where it has improved the security of smaller organizations that lack that expertise. And again, 22301 gives these organizations a framework to improve their business continuity. It's in their interest. So we're in a much better place than we were in those bad old days, let's say. Mel or Rachel, over to you.
Yes, I am happy to chip in there as well. Interesting. I mean, how critical would a gardener be to your business? I can see the point that you're making there. But again, with all the ISO standards, not just 22301, you need to take a risk-based approach, don't you? And I agree, you know, you shouldn't be applying it to all of your supply chain, just the business critical ones. So say, for example, if you're an organisation and you outsource all of your IT, all of your data hosting, why wouldn't you ask for them to have good business continuity plans in place, because it's your reputation that's on the line and that's at stake, and it's you that could be damaged financially and from a reputational point of view if your supply chain, critical supply chain that is, not the gardeners, let you down.
Yeah, that's really sorry, Rachel, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to say I fully support that, and that's actually the approach that most organisations do take, that risk-based approach, criticality of suppliers, and just asking the question, well, you know, if this supplier fails, what's the impact to us, and using that as a basis for asking those more in-depth questions around a supplier's own business continuity arrangements.
Okay, thanks, Derek. I hope that answered your question, and thanks for asking it, because it helped us reinforce the point of that risk-based approach. Thanks very much indeed. Do we have any more questions? Okay. In that case, then, I'm going to end the webinar now. Ladies and gentlemen, thanks very much for joining the webinar. You will receive a copy of the slides and the recording, and on behalf of myself and NQA and Blackmores, hopefully we look forward to hearing from you in the near future. Have a good day now. Thank you and goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.